Welcome to Ojas Oasis. This is a place where you will learn how to optimize your body, mind, and spirit in ways you have longed for a long time, perhaps your entire life. Our mission is to help you cultivate, nourish, and protect your ojas, your immunity, and inner peace. Okay, namaste. Here we are, part 2 of a 3-part series with Freedom Cole. We started with Ayurveda. Today we're going to be talking about yoga therapy. And in part 3, we're going to be talking about astrology or Jyotish, and how each of these 3 aspects of the Vedic system work on their own and then also in congruence with one another. So I'm super excited to talk about this with you, given your background with yoga, growing up with a yoga teacher as a mama, which is such an incredible karma to have a mother who is a yoga teacher. It's amazing. But I'd love for us to start part 2 kind of similarly as we did in part 1 by defining the word yoga. And then we can also define Ayurveda, because we didn't really do that in part 1. Most people who listen to Ojas Oasis, since it's an Ayurveda podcast, we talk about what Ayurveda is all the time, but still from you, it will be really interesting to hear how you would define yoga versus yoga therapy, and then also Ayurveda.
Yeah. And so, with Ayurveda, Veda has different meanings depending on context. And when we say Ayurveda, it's Veda meaning knowledge, Ayur meaning life and longevity. So it's the knowledge or science of longevity and health. Yoga, there's probably 20 different definitions. Most definitions refer to the balancing of the mental state, coming to a place of sama, of equanimity. If we go, a lot of people overuse the Patanjali definition of yogas chitta vritti nirodha, meaning the cessation of the mind waves. And that's one definition in Patanjali and yoga. The Gita leans more towards the sama, balance, that which is putting us into a place of balance, physically, emotionally, psychologically, a perception of the world that holds balance. And we're in a world right now of extremism, and social media is really pushing humans into an extremism that I don't know if we've been to the level of extremism for the common human in the past, but the social media, it's regularly agitating an extremism, and this is the opposite of yoga, because yoga, that sama, that balance, is also balance of seeing different people's views. Balance with your emotions, and balance in your emotions. It doesn't mean that you don't ever get angry, but if you get angry, you come back to balance. And like this. So I work with I put a lot of emphasis on the balance definition, and that which is the methods of attaining that balance.
Mm-hmm. And in that same vein of distinguishing different words from one another, different definitions from one another, how would we distinguish yoga therapy from yoga?
And so we have yoga teachers, yoga therapy, and yoga therapists. So we have these two branches and the practitioners of them. If we look on the American Western scene, people can do a 200-hour training and be a yoga teacher. And what exactly that means, it varies depending on the school the person went to. Sometimes you can do a lot in 200 hours. In America, the asana has become more popular than other areas. In India, it's always been a little bit more the meditation element of yoga that has been more popular. Different schools put more emphasis on breathing practices, on lifestyle practices. Um, and so yoga is practicing those, particularly for yourself, for self development, for well being in general. A yoga therapist is somebody who is not just studying for their own well being or to be able to teach people for their just general well being or development, but it's understanding disorder and how do we work with disorder, which types of yoga methodologies, what actual individual practices are going to be best for somebody with a spinal issue, for somebody with a spinal disease versus somebody with a spinal accident. What kind of yoga is going to be best for somebody who has depression compared to somebody who has anxiety? Which techniques, what styles, and everything of that nature. In the US presently, there is the International Association of Yoga Therapists, and they have an 800-hour certification after you have your 200-hour yoga teacher training first. So that makes your average certified yoga therapist has about 1,000 hours of training. And like Ayurveda, yoga therapy it's not like you learn it and you're done. It's you learn it and you're on a lifelong journey of learning. And both yoga and yoga therapy, but the yoga therapist is trained in remedial methodology and a deeper understanding of pathology to be able to be much more specific. An average yoga teacher might and when I say average, I guess I'll use the word average because there's some really awesome yoga teachers out there who have 20, 30 years of training and different elements, and it doesn't matter what you put in front of them, they will be in wellness with the person. But the average person of 200 hours, they can actually hurt somebody if there's issues that they don't understand. And the yoga therapy has been getting a lot of recognition this last decade as the research coming out with various clinical trials and research just really show how effective it can be. And various elements of yoga therapy have been being integrated into Western psychology, the medical field, and the U.S. military. Various branches have integrated. They changed the name just so that it doesn't bring any conflict with any religious groups, but they've been integrating various practices because of the clear clinical results that properly applied yoga will give. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How would you note the relationship between Ayurveda and yoga? Because it's a very small, I mean, I did a 200-hour yoga teacher training actually myself.
Yep.
In the West, in New York specifically. That's actually how I found Ayurveda, funny enough. I mean, a couple people were telling me, the word kept coming up in my energetic field, but I first learned about Vata Pitta Kapha, from my yoga teacher training, but it doesn't seem to be a very highly emphasized aspect, and which is surprising to me from what I have come to learn about Ayurveda and yoga. So I'm curious about what you think their relationship or their how important is it to integrate the two?
For somebody who's teaching yoga at a gym, and there's people who say negative about different things. Yoga at the gym is needed. Yoga in a yoga studio that goes much deeper is needed. Yoga as a deeper path of development with a very skilled teacher is needed. So we need all these different levels and realms. Um, But for somebody who's just teaching a basic fitness realm in a gym, them knowing Vata Pitta Kapha and a little bit about body types, that's enough. It works. For somebody who's being more comprehensive, the more Ayurveda they know, the better. And I've also taught Ayurveda for yoga therapists. I'm not teaching now, but I used to teach that at Kripalu, and I myself learned from the Mount Madonna Center back in the 90s, and it was 1996. I did my yoga teacher training with Baba Hari Das at Mount Madonna, and that is actually where I learned about Ayurveda. And I'm double. I'm like, did I see a yoga therapist, an Ayurvedic person before that? I did. I went to an Ayurvedic practitioner just by chance before that, but he just gave me some herbs and told me how to food combine, and I didn't go and dig, and he didn't inspire me to learn a lot more. He didn't explain in detail, but it was in my yoga teacher training that they really broke it down, and which the year after that, I went to the first school I went to, which was the New England Institute of Ayurvedic Medicine. It doesn't exist anymore, but it was awesome school at the time. And with an internship in India, they had this nice little integrated where you did your basics here and you did your more advanced work in India. But so Baba Hari Das, he from the very beginning did not teach them as two separate systems. And what a yoga therapist needs to know about Ayurveda is slightly different than what an Ayurvedic practitioner needs to know. And so there's overlap and then there's differentiation. Because your general, unless a yoga therapist, and I'm talking IAYT certified, unless the yoga therapist is also certified in Ayurveda, they're not going to be recommending herbs and panchakarma to their clients. They're going to be staying within their scope. And a really beautiful thing that exists in the scope of practice of both the yoga therapist in the IAYT world and the Ayurvedic practitioner in the National Ayurvedic Medical Association certified world is in the scope of practice. They mention in Nama, for the Ayurvedic person, you should know when to refer to a yoga therapist. And in the yoga therapist scope of practice, it's listed, you should know when to refer to an Ayurvedic practitioner. And so both are officially required to know when to refer. I don't know if all schools are best at teaching that, but it's there. So we have this inherent overlap. The Ayurvedic practitioner is going to be super crucial when we're dealing with internal realms and health elements that aren't working. And the yoga therapy is going to be extremely beneficial when we're dealing with structural issues, in physical structural issues, and when we're dealing with more psychosomatic, psychological disorders that are impacting the body, which trauma falls under. Trauma falls under, there's a psychological disturbance that is deteriorating the body. And so anytime we're working with autoimmune disorders and things in that spectrum, yoga therapy is so helpful. And even if a client, somebody is working with a client that has a trauma background, if they could have a trauma sensitive, not a trauma sensitive yoga teacher, and I'm going to differentiate, not a yoga teacher that's trying to heal their trauma, but a yoga teacher that knows, hey, this is how to be sensitive to create a safe environment for somebody who has experienced trauma. Um, so if we have somebody with the trauma background to get them doing yoga, it's going to make a world of a difference in our for the success of our Ayurveda. And I say it I said it at Nama this. I think it was this last year or the year before. I said, if you refer to the right people, your clients heal faster and you look better. And everybody laughed. It was as if it was a
I
joke,
remember
and it
that.
wasn't
Yeah.
meant to be a joke. But
Yes.
uh, but
I
you know,
remember that.
if we refer and we're working with the right team, oh my gosh, our clients, the speed of their wellness increasing, it looks good for everybody involved. So on the yoga therapist side, what do they need to know about Ayurveda? Um, we can adjust our yoga for Vata Pitta Kapha in for the Vata Pitta Kapha constitution, for the Vata Pitta Kapha time of life, both in the long sphere as well as the individual. And then the disorder, if the disorder is Vata Pitta Kapha, we can adjust the practice. And so we have multiple ways to give these little adjustments. And when I say adjustments, just as a little example, somebody who's either in the Vata, somebody that has high Vata, we want a much more grounded practice. We want to focus a little bit more on the feet. We want time periods where they're laying down and we're really making sure the Apana Prana is being activated. Somebody, if you do that to somebody who's kapha, they're going to be falling asleep. They're going to be like tired. It's not what they need. They need a much more active, moving practice, and we don't want them to be in stillness and grounding too much. They're already grounded and over still. And so having the training to be able to recognize the nature of the constitution and to give the appropriate yoga accordingly is a big deal for um, if there's a disorder, bringing wellness, and if the person is in health, sustaining that well-being.
Mm-hmm.
If we look at stage of life, the early stage of life is kapha, and kapha's moving. Kapha's very much more energetic. So the first stage of life, we want that more energetic practice. The end stage of life is vata, and so we want that more grounded, remedial approach in that stage of life. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Understanding a little Ayurveda enough to know when to refer is really important for the yoga therapist. Um, I've seen yoga therapists who are trying to treat arthritis, and to try and treat arthritis with just yoga, it's 110% possible, and we're looking at years till the person gets relief. If where Ayurveda can in a matter of weeks get relief for arthritis. And so if we're getting that relief for arthritis through the Ayurveda, and we're integrating the proper, whether Vata Pitta, asana, and pranayam practice to keep the doshas in balance, then oh my gosh, we get the arthritis out of them and we keep it out of them with the yoga. So there's this real integrated, connected way for them to work good. And if you don't know at least a little of Ayurveda, you wouldn't know to refer that client for arthritis. And and
Yeah.
I'm using arthritis as an example, but there's so many like that.
Yeah. It seems like the essence of what you're saying is integrative approaches. As long as everyone really steps up with their specialty and really knows what they're doing and they work together, um, it is the absolute most optimal, efficient way to approach healthcare.
100%.
When, I mean, and it seems so commonsensical. And at the same time, For some reason it's not being practiced that way, but it is definitely, definitely, it makes so much sense that we work with others, you know, as a team. um because yeah, I mean, it's there's this ocean of knowledge is so vast. And they say, you know, when we start studying, they're like, it's going to take you lifetimes just to do, just to learn one, you know, one line of the text, to really know it. Have fun for a couple lifetimes, you know, like if you really want to dive into the depths of it. So we
The
really do
the
rely on one another to, you know.
Yeah. When I was studying in
Go ahead.
Pune, the doctors would always make this joke that Ayurveda, what a wonderful thing to spend your life studying, and they'd all laugh afterwards. And it's
Yeah.
true. These are lifetimes of studies, and it's important we have our branch that we're good at, and in our and both our initial education and then in our continuing education, we're learning about the other branches that support whatever main branch we are a part of or a practitioner of.
Especially the more complex the pathology and the more complex the condition, right? I mean, it's not so simple to just go at it with one uh system,
It's
or not one
it's
system, but like
it's
it.
not the traditional way.
Mhm. Yeah. Okay, so I wanted to talk about the limbs of yoga, because mainstream, as you kind of mentioned, you noted that like yoga, so society knows yoga as a means of centering and calming, and everyone kind of has a basic fundamental understanding that yoga is going to be good for you. Like people know it's a good idea.
Most
But
people.
people kind of equate, most people kind of have like, okay, if you, maybe they have a bias toward the demographic of people who like to do yoga, or they have some sort of like superficial, you know, like detraction away from it. But for the most part, people know it's a healthy concept.
A
And
funny
at the same
little
time,
story there. Um, I
yeah,
had a
yeah.
student who was teaching yoga in the jail system locally for reducing residuism, and people loved it. People loved her there. It made it into the newspapers, and there was this uproar. How dare you teach inmates about Hinduism? So there was this, like, as if yoga was Hinduism, and they were literally forced to close the program. And she said, "What do I do? I'm going to fight this." I said, "Don't fight it. Just wait a month. Wait till it dies out." And I said, "Go back in and say mind body programs for integration." And teachers said, "Do everything the same. Just change the name." And she did. She was back in, same program going, and she actually got funding for it, which there wasn't funding for it previously, just by that. So most people know yoga is good for you, and there's wording and prejudice that lives in American culture.
That's a really, really, really smart and good point. Is that yoga in and of itself is not an English word. It comes from another place in the world, right? So we're already like, yoga, what is that? How do we, that's why I really wanted to start with defining the word, because it's
Yeah.
not mind and body therapy. We understand what that is. What is yoga seems, huh. So there's the um, linguistic or semantics behind what makes it kind of stand out as other or separate from
Yeah.
us. And then there's like you mentioned the religious um undertones that yoga
That
talks
can
about,
and can't
because
be
yeah,
there.
like even can
And
can
yoga
yeah.
itself is not inherently um, bringing any type of religion with it. And Patanjali himself, he uses Ishwara. Ishwara means that there's a greater consciousness or a greater spirit or a divinity. There's some higher force moving things. And one of the main differences between Samkhya and yoga, because Samkhya is near Ishvara. It says maybe there's God, maybe there's not. We don't know. But yoga says there is something. There's something more, and this is fundamental. And the fact that he just says it like that, he and the word that he uses, Ishwar, it's not Shiva, it's not Vishnu, it's not. He's not using a. He's very specifically using a word that does not have a religious connotation, with the intention that any religion would be able to practice yoga and get closer
So
to their
smart of
own
him.
view and perception of divinity.
That's really what has drawn and made me stick to this path, is that it's so universally adaptable, which has made, I think that's part of why it's been able to stand the test of time. And it's part of why every culture seems to have a curiosity, or at least, like flexibility around accepting this. Even the most religious or anti-religious, or like people that are really anti, oh, like that's, some people get really turned off against any sort of systematized way of approaching spiritual life. But because, again, like you said, the words that are chosen are so, make it what you need it to be. Make Ishwara a point of focus. What is that to you? It could be nature, you know, it could be your higher self. It could be an ancestor that passed away that you feel you want to put on your altar to just honor throughout your life. It could be so many different
Ishwara
things.
is it's pointing to something higher than just an ancestor guiding. It's pointing to that there's this bigger force guiding, and it has the connotation of big. It's big, like we're, this is all not an accident that of a world that we're in. So whether you do ancestor work or not, Patanjali isn't overly that's not his focus. He leaves that into the religious world, and it's a nice thing that a lot of the texts do. Like Ayurveda, it doesn't step on yoga's toes. It doesn't step in Jyotish their toes. There's references where we see they know it's there. They know when to refer, but it's not, stay in your scope. And so yeah, the universality and the acceptance of plurality is inherent in Vedic culture.
How do you integrate the different limbs of yoga and the different lineages? Because I know you've studied different styles of yoga. We could talk about what those styles are, but then how we integrate those different aspects of yoga that people may not be familiar with outside of the asana into your classes or your therapies for trauma patients
Yeah,
or clients.
and that's a huge question.
I know.
Huge question there. Because we have the limbs, and we also have a huge amount of theory that goes behind each limb. And the theory that's behind each limb, in some places it overlaps, in some places it's distinct. And there are, and I'm speaking to some of these people who are, fight the system. I actually had a conversation just the other day. It's like, someone's like, I want to be with this protest group or that protest group. I'm like, I don't want to be with the protest group. I want to be with an education group. Like I want to put into the world what I want it to be. I don't want to fight against something. I want to bring the right view in, not fight a wrong view, and let's put that forth. That way, somebody can choose to step into this rightness. But and so with yoga, the limb of asana, vyayama. And so we have the term vyayama, which it basically translates as exercise. And asana, in some zones of America, people they interchangeably asana and yoga. And that's the way I like to really frame it. That's their view. And on a certain level in India, before asana kind of had its revitalization and popularity, when you said yoga, people often associate it pranayama and dhyana. They just like, if you said yoga, that's what you meant. And they didn't even include dharana or some of these other zones as just the common social association. And and we have schools that teach different variations. If When we look at asana, um, uh, Charaka Samhita gives us some very clear definitions. And if we are trying to say, oh, he's not teaching yoga in Charaka Samhita, and we're looking for the word yoga, and we only look at the verse that uses the term yoga, then we actually miss him teaching asana. And because Charaka says, hey, when you're for vyayama, for your exercise, don't do too much, don't do too little. Don't do so much that you're throwing up and sick, and make sure you're doing enough that you're getting your body moving and such. And he says very clearly, make sure you're adjusting for vata pitta kapha. And so that statement of adjusting your exercise for vata pitta kapha is a direct reference to how we implement asana in yoga therapy. And it is the core verses that I utilize to begin my classes when I teach about asana and Ayurveda. I start right there from Charaka Samhita. I don't start with an Ayurveda with a yoga text. I start when I teach that asana for well-being. I start with an Ayurvedic texts, because Ayurveda talks about pathology. Yoga, if we look at some of the Hatha yoga texts, they have little things like, oh, if you do this, it's good for digestion. If you do this, it's good for diabetes. If you do this, it's good for, and so they have this little lists like in the Hatha yoga texts. But otherwise, our pathological theory and teachings we find in Ayurveda. And those fundamental principles directly show up in the yoga world in application. They guide how we apply the yoga. So, so right there, Charaka Samhita for how we do our asana, and then when we start moving more into the pranayama zone, that's where we get much more into core concepts of yoga that we use in Ayurveda in the other direction. Because when we get into and pranayama is breathing practices for anybody who might not know. So when we get into that, understanding the nervous system, which the neurobiological view of that these days is called polyvagal theory. In the Vedic tradition, we call it guna. And so understanding what does rajas look like in body function? What does tamas look like in body function and mental function? And being able to see what guna nature a person is, and translating that into the neurobiological model, understanding the regulation factors of the nervous system is super crucial for us to make sure that we're advising the right types of pranayama. And there's cookbook style, just like in Ayurveda. There's, oh, you have this problem, take this herb. And so there's also, oh, you have this problem, do this breathing exercise. But when we understand guna, then no, it's not, maybe that one that they say to use is not the one that we're going to use for this particular person. Even though the diagnosis word is the same, based on what is showing up in them, in their happening, we are going to adjust those breathing practices to make sure that we are balancing their nervous system, that we are bringing them into sama. We are bringing them into that balance. Then we have dharana and dhyana. And when I teach yoga therapy for mental health, the majority of my focus is on dharana and dhyana. And I do, when I would do a 10-day program, I would do a day on Rajas and Tamas, a day on Sattva, and then I would go into primarily more the Dharana and Dhyana. Um, and in that Rajas and Tamas, we're focusing on breathing exercises and such. Um, and before I go into Dharana, jumping back, I didn't talk about Yama and Niyama. And in yoga as practice, and there's different opinions of this, people in different schools, and how yoga is being Americanized. In my, I spent over a decade in India and in a very traditional lineage. Um, when we do yama and niyama, that's in the yoga realm. When we're doing when we're a relatively healthy human, and we're up developing ourselves and increasing our well-being, yama and niyama are absolutely crucial. Um, One variation between the hatha yoga tradition and the Patanjali tradition is, Patanjali puts yama and niyama first, and a lot of people see that as a krama, and krama meaning, you do this first, and then you do the next step, then the next step, then the next step. A krama order versus just being anga, which is like, hey, I can use my right hand now, I can use my left hand now. And so there's a lot of interpretation of Patanjali's system as we got to do yama and niyama first, then we do the rest. From the more hatha yoga side, and the tradition that I'm in was heavily influenced by the hatha, the Nath yogis, who are much more of a hatha yoga tradition. And Nath yogis in the 15th century in Orissa, for anybody who's interested in that. But and from that perspective, like, people are liars, people are mean, people are violent. Like, this is just the nature. There's people are impure. You say, okay, no more lying. Like, how many people are just going to be like, okay, I'll just stop lying? And so from that tradition, let's start doing the asana, the pranayama, and the meditative practices, and that's going to evolve us. And then once we get to a position, we will naturally start understanding, oh my gosh, I'm being violent, and want to step into a nonviolent position, want to step into a more honest position, because we've awoken a certain deep felt awareness. And so when we understand more the hatha yoga approach to yama and niyama, the average person who's depressed or in anxiety or dealing with trauma, it's not, yama and niyama is not our place to start. And there be people that might disagree with me, but in the tradition that I'm from, yama niyama will come after we start having some sama, some balance. Then we can start bringing in, okay, now you're doing this, let's start working. Why don't you pick this yama? And for just to make sure everyone understands, yama niyama are things like don't lie, don't steal, live a pure life. These kind of, they're like the 10 commandments of yoga. And very simple in that way. And so we bring them in much later, not and I might not ever even touch them when I'm in the yoga therapy realm itself, because I'm working on getting that person into the place of sama. And a lot of people, after they've totally healed themselves with yoga, they naturally want to learn more and read more and discover the yama and niyama on their own. But so I don't put too much emphasis on that, because somebody who's having anxiety attacks, panic attacks, telling them about non-lying, it's not, we're not supporting them at where they are at that moment in time. So going into Dharana and Dhyana, yeah, do you want to say something, add something?
I I was just nodding my head throughout everything you were saying because um well, one of the self-study or svadhyaya is an aspect of the limbs of yoga. But for someone, a trauma survivor, that's not. My next question was going to be about how trauma creates dysregulation in the body and how trauma survivors become experts in self numbing because they don't want to feel these physical sensations in their
Yeah.
body. They don't feel safe.
So let's go that way and remember that let's come back to Dharna and Dhyana because they're important elements of the limbs that are the most important for trauma in actuality. And just to make sure I got that question, it was how does the body become dysregulated, right?
How the body becomes dysregulated, and also the order with which we present yoga, or how we present yoga, because yoga, again, like I was saying, there are limbs, there's different levels or different stages of learning yoga, different aspects of yoga to teach and different yoga aspects of yoga to practice. And for someone starting with a place of not being in sama, not being in balance, it makes sense not to start with yamas and niyamas, because first you got to get someone to be feeling a very, very basic level of safety in their body, to feel like it's it's safe to explore sensations again in your body. And I guess I can just now I feel like I can um, leave the floor to you to talk about how yoga um, helps us learn how to regulate ourselves, and also the order of, like, do we start with pranayama, for example, or do we start with, setting an intention, and how do we as practitioners create that
You
space
got
of
lots of questions
helping.
there. Um, uh,
I do. I know I do.
let's start with the dysregulation situation
Okay,
first.
great,
And
great.
um, uh, who tells us that dysregulation is the most important thing for mental health? Does yoga tell us that, or does Ayurveda? Ayurveda tells us that. And it tells us that, and going back to what I said in the beginning, our theory comes from Ayurveda. When we step into yoga therapy, it's fundamental. The fundamental principles are inherent in the text of pathology, and Ayurveda is the text of pathology. And so Charaka tells us, he says the physical body has three dosha, vata, pitta, kapha. And he says the mind has two dosha, rajas and tamas. And it is this rajas and tamas which causes dysregulation in an individual. And so the excess of tamas or the excess of rajas, and puts us in either a shutdown tamas state or a fight and flight rajas state. And so this rajas and tamas live inside of our mind, and it's mind impacting body. So when we talk about the mind body relationship, the body impacts the mind through vata, pitta, kapha. The mind impacts the body through rajas and tamas. And this is the mechanics of the mind body relationship. And if we start talking about mind body relationship and we don't have a really clear understanding of those core principles, then we are not going to be able to do an evaluation and proper remedials if we don't understand that realm. So that regulation is about how do we get out of tamas, or how do we get out of rajas and into a place of sattva, into a place, and sattva and sama are interchangeable, because when we are in sama, we are in sattva, and when we are in sattva, we have a balanced state of mind. Um, and so and if we get into the high levels of yoga as a practice, then we can parse sama and sattva. But as far as from the yoga therapy practice, sattva and sama are the same for us. And so that was the one question, and then the middle question.
Yes.
Oh, methodology. Where do we start? And and just to translate that into Ayurveda, for this is an Ayurvedic podcast. So do we start with a panchakarma? Do we start with diet? Do we start with some herbs for them? And it depends. It really depends. There might be the person where we just start with diet. There might be the person where we're not going to do anything unless they do a panchakarma first. There's the person where, hey, we're just going to give them a little digestant and we're good. And then you get into the more complex realms. So similarly, whether we get them started with asana, whether we get them started with pranayama, or whether we get them started with dharana or dhyana, those four are what I those are my four baskets of what I'm pulling from with yoga therapy. And it will be very dependent both on the condition, how the condition is showing up, and the individual. So that individual might, like, asana might not work for them. They might be somebody who's very overweight and not in their body and not moving, and so we might start more from a breathing practice and a dharana, a concentration practice first. Where someone else, if I give them a dharana, they're gonna maybe do it 3 or 4 times and be done. So I get them in their body doing the right style and quality of asana. Then they're gonna, once they feel that difference, they're gonna say, okay, what next? And then we can take it to, we can add in the next realm. And there's an incremental element. A lot of times with clients, I will give 1 or 2 and say, okay, this is what we need to be doing while you're working with your therapist, or this is what you need to be doing while you're working with your Ayurvedic practitioner. And so I'll do, so it's very dependent on the person, what they're up to, what their condition is, who else they're working with in their life. Yeah. And just thinking about it. Yeah, and I'm just thinking, like, so the my yesterday morning's client, she's working with an Ayurvedic practitioner, and we gave a type of dhyana practice. And I really went into what we're trying to create with that, why we're doing it, and really just spent most of my time explaining our intention with that, so that she can work with her Ayurvedic practitioner and not have the psychological blocks that are making it so the medicine's not working. There is, there's a client that I had last week who I tried to give her a little bit more of a dhyan, and just not working. She's just not ready. So we just stuck with the dharana, stuck with a specific type of concentration practice that is going to do similar, but is just a little more focused and a little bit more specified for the trauma that she is dealing with. So it will, so even, I gave her a different one and we had to change it. Just so that it would work. So it will depend.
Really quick, can we define dharana and dhyana, and then
Yeah.
can you
So
give
so
kind of like a broad brushstroke of what the
yeah.
examples of what you would recommend under each umbrella?
Yeah. So which is where I wanted to go anyway, right? Make sure we cover these 2 limbs. And we have the samadhi, which is our last limb. And just like I said, that first, the yama niyama, I said for yoga therapy, we're putting this aside. And some people will yell at me for that. Oh, this and I've been in a very traditional place, working with, in a very traditional way, and that's the way. When we're dealing with trauma, that's not the basket we're going into. Similarly, samadhi that's for the spiritual practitioner. That is not for yoga therapy. And samadhi can actually be very contraindicated when we're dealing with trauma, because there's a certain level of disassociation with samadhi. And samadhi is a certain type of meditation. I'll just define it at that for the average person. And we our intention is not to go to samadhi when we're doing yoga therapy. Because there's a disassociative nature of that state, and somebody could say, well, it's a universal unity state, and we're not aiming for universal unity. We're aiming for a healthy body function with yoga therapy. So just that little yoga versus yoga therapy, and so dharana literally means concentration, and dhyana means, we could translate it as meditation. And each of those have multiple levels and variations. They're both very complex, and I spend multiple days on each of them to make sure there's an understanding. And one of the incredible things is we can, once we have a particular dharana, we can integrate that into our pranayama. We can integrate that into our asana. And if the quality of dharana, the quality of concentration, and as an example, do we want so somebody who's dealing more with anxiety, we want a single pointed dharana to be our focus. Meaning, if we're doing asana, focus on the feet. Do the next pose. What are the feet doing in that pose? How's the weight felt there? Go into the next pose. How's the weight here? Is this balance between the right and left? And just staying with a single pointed focus the entire time. Where if we have an open focus, where we're not concentrating on a particular thing, but we're just kind of being present with what's happening, we might move through different poses with an open state of consciousness. And make sure that we're not getting stuck over focusing. Somebody who has OCD, this mental state is what we want to be cultivating in asana. You don't want to be focusing on dharana in asana if the person has OCD. The part of their brain that focuses is overactive. We need to do a completely different direction. Where somebody with anxiety, we need to actually enhance the control function of the mind. So we have this variation, and so dharana, concentration practices. There's so many. I put a lot of emphasis on what are called upaya dharanas. And upaya dharanas are working with the what are called the maha marmas in Ayurveda. And so in Ayurveda, there's different marmas. Those marmas have different purposes, what they're doing, their functions. And so there's different marmas that control different activities. And so I do a lot with different images, visualizations, and holding consciousness in certain marma places to work with what those places indicate. So we're not just increasing focus, but we're also activating a certain relationship with the body that is where the what we need for that particular condition to have its deeper holism brought into wellness.
I love it.
And dhyana means meditation, and most people have a general understanding of meditation. I see that our time is getting short, so I'm not going to go too into that. But so there's different types of meditations we use depending on the condition. Really, meditation used in a proper yoga therapeutic setting is really looking at we're not trying to address anxiety. We're trying to address why is a person anxious. And so the meditation is not addressing like the anxiety or the depression, but what is the root of that? And so we want to design our meditation practices to really be addressing the root, so that we're not trying to like take a pill that gets rid of the anxiety, but why is this person having the anxiety? What is the function in the mental faculty that is deficient or in excess, that through that meditation we can bring into sama, bring into balance.
Mm-hmm. I know we could spend forever talking about. I mean, it's first of all, we both love talking about this exact topic, and second of all, it's that much information, it's that much knowledge that um, it's just so. I keep using the word vast. I need to come up with another word, but there's so many layers.
So
I
many.
know we still have a whole part of this series to go into astrology, so I think a good place to perhaps you tell me if you think this is a good place to at least pause and pivot into astrology, but I'm thinking um a good place in my opinion about where to leave off is the fact that what makes this system so effective, but also what differentiates it from the Western approach would be you kept saying the word or the phrase it depends, meaning there is no
Which is
standardized
Ayurveda, right?
formula for this. It well, I mean that is if we could give like a kind of like a fun little unofficial definition of the like healing approach with Ayurveda, it's like, well, it depends. That's what every single teacher, real true teacher of Ayurveda, will say to almost every single question of a student or even a client. But that's kind of what I feel makes it so effective is that we aren't afraid to ask or to answer the question um, or to tailor the protocols, the treatment protocols to these really detailed nuances of each human being. We aren't afraid to put this amount of detail and this amount of study into one human being. And that is not the way that the Western system is designed. It doesn't allow for um, that detailed of an assessment or that detailed of a treatment protocol, perhaps because of just the it's a for profit.
It is the for-profit insurance industry. It is not that the Western doctors and nurses don't want to. It is the for-profit insurance industry that is shortchanging rogies, people that have sickness. Um, they're the ones that are cut short because of that. I think your statement is great to end on. And when we start our next session on Jyotish, we can start with that same concept and why. Why is it that it all depends? And when we say it depends, because it depends doesn't mean I'm going to do what I feel like. It is extremely scientific, and where another therapist could come along and give almost the same treatment protocols, even though it all depends. And so and this is to me what makes us in this Vedic world. And whether we call yoga Vedic or not, we can define the word Vedic in our next section when we're talking about something that puts the word Vedic in front instead of at the end. But it is a core component of the concept of Vedic. It depends. We're all individuals, and as individuals, we all need something a little different. And there is a right and there is a wrong to what we need. And just because we're all different, it doesn't mean that we can do anything. There's certain things that are good for us, certain things that aren't, certain things that will bring balance, and certain things that will completely make us sick. And it depends for everybody. And when you're trained in Ayurveda and yoga and these other Vedic disciplines properly, it becomes very clear exactly what is causing the imbalance or not. All right.
Waxing poetic. This is poetry. So let's pause here and we will continue in part 3 of this series with Freedom Cole. Yay!
Thank you for listening to Ojas Oasis with Sasha Bershadsky. To learn more about Ayurvedic healing, please visit ojasoasis.com. We'll see you next time, and until then, have your smile.